action, but the inadvertent action of adoption of zoning definitions that changed a group of permitted uses in the B1 district. So
Now, have we published those definitions yet?
those are adopted, and I don't believe they're incorporated into our E-code. General code might take some time to do that, but we may have already received, I think we received, yes, we received from the Secretary of State their acceptance and filing of it as a local law that's now effective. So, and I want to see if I should have a copy of that because.
Do you have a copy of it, Liz?
What?
Of the changes that were, all the new definitions?
Not with me, on my computer.
You do? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I want to see if I can.
I should probably get into the habit of bringing my computer with me.
You take Tom's old place. He was the keeper of the code
Yeah, where did that blue book go?
downstairs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, the clerk's office.
But that won't have it in it.
Is bringing them up to date.
No, that's the old one, right?
And John, you may or may not be aware that we have on our website a link to the village code, which is put together and maintained by a company called General Code, which has most of the municipal business in New York and surrounding states. What I'm going to do just before we begin is actually send myself from downstairs the finalized, because I have a feeling we may want to talk about that. It affects a few things that.
And I think Michael was expecting to be here, but not until later, is the email I got.
Okay.
Good evening. Welcome to the Village of New Paltz Planning Board. A little different agenda tonight. We have no applications in front of us. So we're going to have an informal discussion on some issues before us. Let me introduce our newest soon-to-be member, John Liston. Will be joining us as soon as the village board swears at him. Well, you swear to the village board. Yes, that's right. That's the way it goes. And Liz, Michael will be joining us very soon. Our noble leader, Kurt.
Thank you. Of course, again, there's no applications on our agenda for tonight. The purpose of this meeting is really to discuss policy as it applies to the village's efforts to recodify not only zoning, but other sections. Anything applicable to land use policy is really appropriate subject matter for our discussions tonight. The discussions that we have and any recommendations or advice offered by one or more board members will be helpful to me as I prepare additional sections of zoning to the village board for their consideration. We also, there also will be some, let me just check something. Okay, among the topics that we might be discussing tonight are, for example, the most recently annexed property on Henry W. Du Bois is currently zoned R1, but the village board is expecting a recommendations for zoning that recently annexed property. And again, it's off of Henry W. Du Bois, and it actually, its configuration is such that there actually is a small piece of some number of acres that lies within the town, but you must now go through the village to get to that land. There's no particular practical implications of that. It's just something that would be noticeable for looking at a map when we amend our map to show this annexed property. When I came to work for the village last year, I discussed with the village board the need for new zoning regulations for this property. It was also the subject of some discussion at a village board meeting as to what might be the proposed uses. There was some discussion of mixed uses for that. However, it's in a residential area, and as I develop a draft zoning regulations for this particular property. It's hard for me at this time to imagine mixed use in that area. Obviously, it's not very far from Main Street, and this area is thoroughly residential at the time, at this time. So that's going to be, we'll only know what the true direction of the zoning for that area is after the village board reviews a proposal from me for zoning regulations for this parcel.
Okay, and I quick question. When it was annexed, so has been annexed already.
Yes.
When it was annexed into the village, what zoning designation was it given, if any? Or that's still pending?
No, it was assigned an R1, and I was told that was done merely.
So that it had a designation,
Yeah.
and
We
now...
gave it the most restrictive zoning residential that we had.
Okay, and then knowing that at a future date, we were going to revisit its
That's correct.
zoning category?
Yes.
Okay,
There was also a moratorium that was put on near simultaneously that
That's
went
correct.
along with that R1 zoning.
okay,
Yeah, and there was some discussion over whether that particular property would be the subject of a moratorium, and in the end, it was included in the moratorium. However, the owner of the majority of the property was satisfied with the current designation, but the village board wanted a hard look at proposed regulations that would allow or encourage or mandate different types of development than the R1. The R1, of course, does allow a number of uses beyond single family, including age-restricted housing in particular.
meaning for elderly community?
55 and over.
Okay.
So, in other words, not necessarily the format of Woodland Pond. In fact, unlikely to be the format of Woodland Pond, which is sort of a continuum of care. And this, I believe that the thought is, as it was explained to me, independent living, meaning nothing more than age restrictions, but no common dining or medical resources on site.
Now, see, you and I differ a little bit on the future of that property, in that I see two major east-west arterials that go through the village. One being Main Street, which is such a clogged artery, it's amazing we don't have a heart attack. The other is Henry W. Du Bois. If Henry W. Du Bois is one of our major arterials moving through the town, why can't it handle mixed use?
It can if we wanted to. Can it handle it? Can it be properly assigned that designation? Yes.
I mean, we need to grow some of our commercial base. It's the best taxpayer we have for our school districts. It's a great taxpayer for us. And here's this new opportunity, and to restrict it to a use when it's on a major, I mean, it's one of the widest roads we have.
It's a wide road. Actually, I'm gonna.
And it connects Route 32 with the upper end of town, you know, very close to the thruway entrance.
Absolutely.
It's got several offshoots from it that take it into traffic lights. Two. You know, I was just thinking, looking at that property and looking at the future, if we're going to develop the B3 zone at the end of it, why not bring this into it?
Yes, and actually, that may well be the direction that I get from the village board. I don't know at this time. The Main Street is indeed congested at many times of the week and many times of the day. That I'm not sure that we really can do much about what you might call the levels of service. In other words, the how bad or good the traffic flows at any given moment. I'm not sure how much we can really do about that. It's a problem associated with many successful main streets. It's gridlock, it's backed up over intersections and crosswalks at various times. That's true.
Yeah, I don't think there's any argument that it's at or past capacity, but my idea is not to relieve it. You know, I don't want it to die or go away or suffer at all. I love Main Street. But if we're going to grow the village, the only street to grow it on would be Henry W. Du Bois.
Aside from North Chestnut.
I was just going to say, how about right,
North Chestnut
north-south?
connects what? You got to come down Main Street to get to it, number one.
Well, or Henry Du Bois, or Henry W. Du Bois. I guess you had said, where can we grow? And of course, we're hoping
Well,
to.
even North Chestnut's a very limited amount of space down there.
Well, I mean, we hope that what we adopted wasn't in vain.
I don't think it was. I'm just saying the future looks brighter than maybe we all might think. And I don't think the future is just in residential homes in New Paltz.
No, well, actually, the North Chestnut District allows for
Mixed
almost
use.
every conceivable use you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And that was the intention, and 4 stories as well. So what we're hoping for is hundreds and hundreds of housing units. That's what it allows. The coverage, the floor area ratio are extremely permissive and extremely malleable for developers to consider. I would certainly want the village board's direction on, in terms of a true mixed-use development on Henry W. Du Bois. Right now, that's a residential area, so I'd probably be looking for the advice of the planning board and the direction of the village board.
Okay?
I have a question. Right now, you're saying that we're at R1 for that particular piece of property, and if we were to switch it to mixed use, not having the blue book right in front of me, what mixture are you talking about, Rich?
Well, did you ever? I don't travel much. I'm known to never go outside of the zip code. You know,
Okay.
I'm the original staycation guy. You know. But my last trip down to South Carolina, I visited a couple of these little areas where the new developments were residential based with commercial centers, and they would mix them right in. They almost created these little towns. And
I was
little
just about to say, isn't that kind of like creating a teeny-weeny mini village within
That's
the
what,
village?
yes. I mean, there's really no commercial development up that end of town, or village, or whatever we call New Paltz nowadays, where we got these borderlines so close together. It's an area of growth. And I would like to see us, not just have it be filled with apartments and houses, and I think we can do some mixed use in there very nicely. But you got a long discussion ahead of you, and that's just my 2 cents going in for it. And it's the only area of the village currently that's got roads that can handle it. We don't have any other streets that are big enough to handle it. I mean,
Well, we're hoping that we certainly think North Chestnut can.
but to get to North Chestnut currently is mainly a Main Street issue.
You
I
can
think-
get to it via Shivertown Road also.
Yeah.
I mean, the long way around, but still accessible. Not trying to be intentionally contrary, but I have a hard time seeing mixed use within a village as small as it is. Having an enclave of mixed use almost independent of the rest of the village of New Paltz. I'm not really sold on that idea. I don't, or maybe I'm visualizing it differently than what you're saying.
Well, I think the best thing to do is to get it up and get it discussed. So propose something, and we can start discussing.
And actually, there'll need to be some comprehensive, in other words, with the lack of a current master plan and one that discusses mixed use for that, there need to be some foundation master planning done to create a new district like that. Obviously, North Chestnut Street had that, most of that planning work performed approximately 6-7 years ago. And actually what we're hoping to do is create a new neighborhood there, not so much a destination where you have to go through Main Street, where a lot of visitors might head towards Main Street or the Huguenot District, or Water Street Market. I think the intent was really to create a new neighborhood where people would be based there as new residents of the village. But there will potentially need to be master planning done in order to zone this site, which is unlike what we just undertook with the North Chestnut Gateway District, where that work was already in place. So that's one thing that's certainly an important thing going on right now. We've been talking about parking, and I think I'm hoping that the planning board's parking recommendation, that what we've had a public hearing on, what we've received comments from the county on, I'm hoping that that'll be voted on by the village board and approved. And,
Can you just give us your 2-second synopsis of what that is?
Sure.
Because it's gotten confusing over time.
Yes.
How much of it is up to us? How much of the discretion is up to us?
Well, the discretion is the planning board's. If this were to be adopted, the discretion in parking would be the planning board's. However, the burden is to provide reasoned elaboration as to how we came up with the requirements. So really, most of that will fall on the planning board's direction to me in terms of, writing resolutions of approval and justifying the parking that we've come up with. So we've taken, of course, our parking, our prescriptive requirements, and are proposing to make them guidelines.
And then it's my understanding that the county then came back and said something in between.
Yes, actually, they favored a formal waiver, which, again, I thought the recommendations from the county were good. They were good. At the same time, we've been waiting for this to be adopted, and it hasn't been on a village board agenda for some number of meetings. So at this point, I'd like to make sure that it's adopted either with the village board asking me to amend it, or as it is now. The waiver process would be a more formal way of doing it.
But we're not going to have to justify the parking requirement.
Yes,
That's
well-
my understanding, that's exactly what we'd
Yeah.
have to do, is that we have to come
I'm
up
afraid
with the
that's what it was.
Well,
justification.
it needs to be anything but random. It needs to be consistent. And I think that the county appropriately pointed out that what we really started out, and I still think that we consider it something of an interim way of dealing with parking, because there are several parking initiatives going on at the same time right now in the village. Some of them have to do with parking regulations and parking lots and things of that nature, and some have to do with the discretion of the planning board. I wouldn't call this a final solution for parking. I think it's an interim method whereby we no longer go about trying to circumvent our own parking regulations, which are suburban in nature and render certain properties virtually unusable, which could end up conceivably being a taking. So there was good reason for the planning board to take this matter up. I don't think that that whether or not there be a waiver provision, that it's even close to ideal. But what we're trying to do is avoid the need to prove to the zoning board in every case that there needs to be a waiver. And as we saw that come up a lot, we thought appropriately that it required action. And so we're waiting for action on that from the village board.
But at this point, it's out of the planning board's hands.
It is, yeah.
I still like the waiver idea that the county came up with. I think that as the planning board changes with incoming and outgoing members, that, none of us are lawyers. And us coming up with justification for why or why not is putting a little bit too much on the planning board because we are not lawyers.
Explain the county waiver, what it means, what they're doing.
Let's see if I can call up the actual recommendation of the county and make sure that I get it correct as far as the points they had made.
We have dead air in the meantime.
Yeah, I'm afraid that actually it might take a little bit too long for our purposes. The county was suggesting that that the planning board be allowed to grant waivers, and instead of merely at its discretion. So the requirements would remain, the parking requirements would remain requirements, and a waiver could be granted. Now they did go a little bit further in explaining it, and I don't remember, it's now been over a month since we got the response from the county, and I'd like to be able to paraphrase it better.
It looked a little bit like a ZBA variance to me, to tell you the truth.
That's what it
More of
sounds
a,
However, not involving the zoning board.
involving the zoning board.
So the county understood our needs and desires in that regard, in other
That
words.
if we recognized a property as unique, we could identify it as such. But
So it would just remove one layer of the process from somebody's making an application.
That's true. I think it would still
it was
accomplish.
I'm confused on it, John. I really don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, actually, I want to, again, I don't know how long it would take me to actually find the email version I got of it before it was mailed to us. But the effect is still the same in that the planning board would have the discretion to, especially where we have properties that simply don't have any lot area for off-street parking. We haven't come to this point yet, but the potential was there to render a property nearly useless unless we found a way to give it some relief. Another topic that's very current is the village is interested in establishing sustainable construction practices for new construction. We have a village resident who I've met with a couple of times and discussed this with. He's LEED certified and a registered landscape architect, and also on the bicycle pedestrian committee. So I've been encouraged to involve well-qualified volunteers from the community in this. And it's of course this is not so simple either, in as much as the LEED certification system is not, the certification is not awarded by LEED until well after the completion of the project, and there's almost an audit of how it performs, and that would be introducing something new. So that could well be why no communities in the greater region that I'm aware of have adopted a strict standard for LEED certification in conjunction with approval of projects. There are also green building standards, and if I understand correctly, they may refer more specifically to renovations and projects than new construction. Again, I'm trying to get acquainted as much as possible with these various rating systems, but the intent is to create new development that is truly energy efficient and environmentally harmonious. So that's the intent, and we have to figure out a way to implement
Well,
it.
the town of New Paltz adopted Energy Star as part of their building code. So if you want to build a new home in the town of New Paltz now, you got to meet Energy Star code. The problem, of course, is that they didn't fund the training of their building department. So now builders, developers, and the building department has to go outside and hire consultants anytime you want to build a house. So
Yeah, but how difficult, I mean, how time-consuming or costly would it be to get the town's representative to be up to speed on that?
the town still hasn't done it. Now, right now, if
Shame on
I
them.
get a building, if you get a building permit in the town for new construction, you have to go outside of the town and have it certified that it will meet the Energy Star code, because the building inspector is not qualified.
But if the town made that rule, then why don't they follow up on that and make their building inspector certified in that?
So we haven't merged yet, because the town doesn't always do everything they should do. It's the problem with making some of these rules. I mean, sustainability is a great idea. Energy code is a great idea, but we have to have some way of making it work. We've got a tremendous housing stock of antiquated properties. For me to take John's house and make it Energy Star rated is next to impossible, short of taking it down. It's next to impossible. Certainly even in terms of renovations on these things, and to try to blend some of this in there. We can always look towards smarter building, but sometimes a blanket regulation like it has to be Energy Star code built don't always work.
Would going with that, what you just said, that taking an older house, and I'm also in an older house, built 1909 or 1910,
Right.
the sustainable construction practices, would that apply only to new housing?
Sustainable
or-
construction practices and Energy Star are different. Sustainable talks about
But the
products.
village he's saying, the village is saying, let's look at sustainable, but he's not saying we're looking at Energy Star.
Have we defined what sustainable is?
No, not that I know of.
No, well, what we have to do is select one of the established systems for judging construction as sustainable or
What
not.
are besides LEEDs, what are the other?
National Green Building Standard. Those are the two that I'm readily aware of, and that's not to say that there aren't several others that I'm not well versed in.
And part of the problem, of course, is that as new products come on, they're kind of in flux. So,
Perpetually in flux.
yeah.
In the end, the discussion on this will continue because the village is seeking, well, to provide standards for new construction, and the question is, what actually works. And we don't know yet, but we do have some resources within the community and a general commitment to it. As far as whether that would apply to renovations and the like, that's another question. And at what threshold might it apply to renovations? So that's a
Well, as I would imagine that any homeowner would want to be as energy efficient as possible. If they're going to spend the money on the renovation, they're not going to put in single pane windows, for example. They probably want to up it to something that has a better rating. Why spend the money if you're going to have the same old stuff?
Yeah, but I think that the thing is more to somebody, making a alteration to their house or a repair, or God forbid you have a fire. How much can you put the house back to what it was before? Right, you wouldn't want to put in old single pane windows again. In fact, I don't even know where you can buy them, so I don't know how much of an issue that really is anymore. It's just that, sometimes to make these regulations without having the backup, without having a clear cut, how are you going to make this work? How are you going to police it? How are you going to enforce it?
Well, that's where we're at right now.
It's a nice discussion, but
Yeah, it's very true. And again, it's been largely conceptual so far. And actually that could even be something that might be further investigated as part of a master plan update. But I know that it's considered at least urgent to the extent that if we're going to allow for a lot of freedom in building in this new North Chestnut Gateway District, one of the strings that would be attached is some measure of improved building practices and diminished energy use and things along those lines. I think that there's a general sentiment in the village and village board members on that. And as far as the specifics, I think we do have a little ways to go on that for sure. Be sure. Yeah. Another.
hey, Michael,
I'm sorry about that.
we are live, Michael.
Hello?
Of course, there are no applications on our agenda this evening, really a rather free-form discussion of issues. And, another one that we were talking a little bit about, there are several initiatives going on right now with regard to signage. One is, I think it was mentioned, and I've mentioned to our code enforcement officer that there are a couple of, or at least one sign that I don't believe has a permit. It looks like a nice sign that went up at the bus station, but I think that'll get some attention.
I think there's a second sign on Main Street right next to the middle school that I don't believe had permitting.
The one that says student housing? Yeah, that's a temporary sign, though, that comes under,
No.
it's like real estate sign, isn't it?
Well, it's a temporary sign if it's advertising a dwelling unit inside those premises. What happened was, of course, it started out as a large sign, a piece of wood chained to a tree. I asked our code enforcement officer to please check its compliance, and it doesn't comply. In other words, for advertising a dwelling unit for sale or for rent inside on those premises, of course you're only allowed a tiny sign. Basically, what we all know is a real estate sign that comes and goes with the sales of houses or an apartment for rent. So you're allowed really a very small amount of aggregate, that is to say both sides of the sign square footage. The sign was modified in some way and cut down. However, what's allowed is so small that this still doesn't come close to conforming. It's nailed to a tree. So that's something that I've also brought to the attention of the code enforcement officer, who has her own discretion as code enforcement officer, but it's something that I've identified as non-compliant. The initial efforts were to remove it, and it was removed, and it would reappear. It was removed, and it would reappear. So, to be honest with you, it's becoming just basically a lot overly time-consuming from an enforcement point of view, and I'd like to just see it resolved appropriately as soon as possible.
What's the one that's at the bus station? The taxi?
That's there's a new sign up there. And I think it's for.
Coffee?
The
I think
coffee
so.
house, right?
Yeah.
For the cafe coffee thing.
Yeah, that hangs off the side of the building.
It's out on the
actually,
corner. It's up on a big 4x4
Oh, really?
post. Yeah, right on the street. Now, does that come under the building inspector's office, or does that come under site plan? Does that come to us? I'm never quite sure on our sign code whether signs come to us or not.
If they're when they're proposed as part of development, when there's an application before us, my own feeling is that we should be addressing the signage during that process. I don't believe that that has been the practice, but I believe that that's the intention of site plan approval wherever, in whatever town, village, or city that it's administered in New York State. That's, I think it should be incorporated into that process. As far as an individual sign that's not related to an existing application before the planning board, then of course we want to get to it as soon as possible and.
But that's outside of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Another item is.
So actually, that raises a hybrid question. If a sign was approved in the context of a site plan, and a couple of years later they want to change their sign, can they just go through the building department at that point?
Well, my instinct is to say yes, because, again, it's very difficult for me to imagine putting someone through a site plan amendment process for that. So I see what you mean about whether, okay, are we incorporating it into a site plan? And I think we've probably gotten to the heart of it as much as we can. We could either continue to do it separately from the process, or alter it. But no, in a short year, I think I've seen enough to know that that could be an incredible burden on the property owner or the tenant involved.
So for the best interest of somebody bringing in a site plan, don't put your sign on it.
Well, again, yeah, I mean, that's.
Well,
yeah.
It would be easier to just go through the building inspector.
Yes,
And
although.
more flexible.
That's true, except that, let's take, for example, something that's not a small business, but a much larger project. Signage could take on a much greater, could have a much greater impact. And I think we really want to know the location and the style of the sign. We're talking something more than a small business. So again, we may have cut to the chase at this point on it, and I don't think I have an answer for each
I
situation.
don't think we neglect them. I think we respect the impact the sign is going to have in that location. So if it's a modest sign, we might ask that it comply, and if it's necessary, we can look at it. But as you said, if there was a new gas station or something like that, then the signage could be a significant issue because of the way that they put signs up. So that would be more something we would consider.
Or you got an issue like the bus station's got multiple businesses on one property.
Right.
What does the signage look like by the time you're done?
Right, well then, yeah, that's a,
Our sign code attempts to address multiple businesses on a particular site. I'm not sure, again, it's in the same way that we're discussing certain things right now, it's probably difficult to get it nearly perfect. I think in some cases, it might be, you might be able to foresee that the remaining signage allowed would be very small, especially depending on if it's an existing development with a new tenant or a new space. We, at the last zoning board of appeals meeting, we had an application for relief from a requirement which requires that a fence at the building line of a home to the front property line, that it be no greater than 4 feet in height. And an area variance was sought for one that was 6 feet high. The impression I got from the discussion was that this regulation was not immediately embraced as having self-evident worth. In other words, I suppose it's to keep residential properties from looking, from being hidden behind opaque fences but they're at the same. I wonder. It wasn't immediately clear to me if there was recognition that this regulation has worth. So there is a possibility that I might ask if the direction that I should be given is to eliminate that regulation.
And this was 4 feet just for the front?
Yes, actually, well, it was a corner lot, but it was to, and this actually, I should mention, it wouldn't alter another requirement we have in the code, which is a geometric requirement so that at a corner, drivers can see as they're looking both ways.
So you'd still have line of sight
Right.
on a street corner?
There's a line
Even a
of sight.
4-foot side, it's can't block that.
There's a line of sight regulation in our code that calls for a triangle to be drawn from the intersection, 30 feet from the intersection itself, and that is probably standard language developed by civil engineers that is probably in place in the other codes. So this wouldn't affect that safety aspect. I believe that, I guess the idea is to not block the view of homes or not have something look too much like a fortress. But it was, when I see area variances requested at the ZBA and it's not immediately known what the benefit of the regulation is, I think it's fair game for discussion at least. So, again, what we have there is an applicant going through a fairly elaborate process just to get heard by the ZBA. And that brings me to something else. And it also ties into mentioning the burdens on small businesses. In other words, our process requires that all property owners within 200 feet of the subject premises be given receive a certified mailing. That can be, in a village environment, that can incorporate an awful lot of properties by the nature, just simply by the nature of the fact that our parcels are much smaller than surrounding towns. So what you have is typically, I'm sorry, a little on less.
And that 200 feet is from where?
Property line.
From the property line, from any of the.
Is that
properties.
specified in the code?
Yeah, I think so. I can.
Yes, it's the property lines.
But what this goes to, the discussion I'm aiming at is whether you're a small business that is trying to establish yourself in a particular site that is already existing, is not being built from the ground up, or whether you're a homeowner seeking a variance, perhaps a fence variance. Our procedures are fairly daunting. Now, I think that nearby neighbors want to know what's going on, and receiving a certified letter is a good way to do that. However, that 200 feet can be an awful lot in an urban environment.
But how do you restrict it in when it comes to lessen the restriction for, say, a single-family dwelling that's asking for something like a fence versus keeping the restriction for something that would affect houses that are 200 feet away?
Well, one thing that has changed since that regulation went into effect, which was an old regulation, is that we now have the scarlet letter that goes on every house that goes before the ZBA. You got to post the red sign on the property. So if you got a house within a reasonable number of feet of that, you do not miss that red sign post. I mean, that's pretty evident that your neighbor's got something going on here. Two, we televise our meetings and the information gets out to people quicker. There's more information disseminated than there used to be. And the 200 feet nowadays also includes things like condominiums and townhouses that we never had before. All of a sudden, if I want to do one in my little garage, I've got Briarwood to deal with. Because it's not one owner. It's not an apartment complex that has one owner. It's 60 owners, just in that one little building. It's an archaic rule. I don't know why we even have it anymore. I don't understand why. It's not necessary for the abutting neighbor. It's not necessary for a neighbor 200 feet away. It's not necessary.
I think it's fair game for our discussion and fair game for the village to reconsider, because I see that just putting together an application in some cases can be an impediment to being heard on it. And at that point, I start to see things that are at odds with one another. The village website, I think, is being improved. I think that, I don't think a lot of citizens necessarily see it as the resource that it could be. In other words, the notion of, just as Rich mentioned, in other words, you take certified mailings, a little bit archaic. Indeed, I think they still have to be done by hand. I don't think there's a way to do it on a form that's available online. It's cumbersome, it's time consuming, and it's expensive. And again, my main point is to start by discussing that it has to be 200 feet from any property line, and whether or not this part of the process is kept, or whether it's, or the burden is reduced, depending on the type of the application. I think that might be an important decision to make. The other thing is that the notice in the newspapers are, of course, our official newspapers are the Daily Freeman and the New Paltz Times. If we could probably have the village quickly adapt, if they knew that the village website was going to have a lot of information on it, it could be a place that you might routinely check to see if there's activity that you're interested in, whether or not you're a specific distance from the property. It might be, so in that way it would allow residents to check in and see what's going on in various agendas. We have to establish it as a real resource, though. I think right now it may not, we don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have a standardized process for what is advertised on the village website. It's not. I could be wrong.
It also used to be the village incurred the cost fees. It wasn't that the applicant had to pay for them to deliver them. It was done by the clerk.
The notifications.
The notifications, yeah. So it wasn't that long ago.
I mean, most people show up with those notifications going, I got this letter.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Your neighbor wants to put a deck on. Oh,
That's true. The letter.
I had to go in for that, I mean,
That's right. The letter doesn't specify. The letter is similar to the
to the public notice.
the sign that's at the front of the property, in the sense that now it is in the sense that you're passing by, whether you're driving, which would be awfully hard to see, or walking. Then at least what it says is call the building department. It provides our telephone number for additional information. But you're right. I think the notice comes in the mail, and again, I think it's probably time that at least we consider, the village considers its options on that.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's clearly, there's lots of other means, as you said.
Well, is there
We can use.
a way to say that this district doesn't, some districts wouldn't have to go by the 200-foot rule because it's residential versus some form of commercial, but yet still have commercial places have to adhere to, in other words, different distances depending upon what zone you're in?
a system like that could be devised. Of course, it would have some failings in where the perimeters of these areas are. In other words, it's not always going to be clearly definable, and especially as we rezone for things like mixed uses. In other words, we just turned a highway commercial district that didn't allow any residences into something that allows an awful lot of mixture of uses. So, and again, I'm a strong advocate of that. But one of the side effects is that you no longer have as well defined pods of types of uses and separations between uses anymore. One of the things I'm going to check on is are the state enabling statutes restrictive enough, at least with regard to variances, where the state actually does not permit us to deviate from the notification requirements. That's not the case with site plan.
Do you think it's a state requirement on this notification?
Well, there is, and I'm actually that's something I think I might be able to call up without too much dead time.
Yeah, but for public hearings, for site plan, special use permits, it's definitely up to us.
Yes, that's right, yeah. What we all, I think we would probably all agree that in the case, relatively rare case of a use variance, that, that a perimeter of neighboring property owners would like to be made aware of that. It's what I'm seeing what I see on a daily basis in the office, and this goes as well for the other places I've worked in Hudson Valley, and that is that I see a lot of homeowners and like feeling that just the procedures to get to the process and to get the consideration are time consuming, and so something that we may want to look at there. I think the variances may require by state, but just as Michael said, that's not the case with site plan and special permits and subdivisions. I have to check that just to make sure we know what our options are.
That's worth looking into. Did you all talk about the parking stuff before we got here?
A little bit.
Just a bit, not exhaustive in any way. We talked about the fact that the county, of course, had made a recommendation
Mhm.
that they understood what we were attempting to do and they supported. However, they advocate more of a waiver system. So it's almost as if we would be our own zoning board of appeals, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I think their recommendations were most welcome. I think that they knew what we were trying to accomplish. And as I mentioned to the other board members, there's a burden on the planning board, which of course also really falls upon me and any other consultants involved to justify the deviations from what would become guidelines and are now prescriptive requirements. So, and that's been pointed out by several parties, again, including the county planning department. They think a waiver process would be a little bit more structured, and I have to admit that I think that probably would be an improvement to our proposal. It hasn't been on the village board's agenda, so I wrote to the village board asking if they'd like to adjust it per the county comments, or would they like to adopt it, but I'd appreciate some direction, because the planning board and other property owners have been waiting for some change in this regard for a while.
Okay.
And of course, there are other initiatives, there are other park initiatives that are ongoing. There's of course a plan for regarding parking regulations. In other words, how long you can park. I really welcome the idea of having the Plattekill lot be 4 hours rather than 2. It was established at some point as 2 hours, but of course, a lot of people come to New Paltz to visit, and they may well stay much longer than 2 hours. And I feel strongly about accommodating them, of course, and also even signage. There is a sign at the corner of Main and Plattekill. However, it has been there's a lot of stickers on the sign, and it also it's been placed a little bit low on the signpost. Some signs in some places are harder to reach to the face than others. So while that sign is there, what I realized was I hadn't seen it myself, and I think one of the reasons is as you drive west on Main Street and approach our most significant intersection, pretty much, at least on Signal, at Main and Plattekill, you're looking for the activity in the crosswalks, and you come upon the sign that's right there, whereas I believe that a lot of wayfinding, it's generally held that you would post a sign maybe 100 feet back to give you that warning that a left or a right turn is coming up for municipal parking. And I have to believe in the short time that I've worked and worked for and lived in the village, I have to believe that I see the looks of visitors driving around the village. They might be more easily persuaded to make a left turn and go for an easy and predictable long-term parking space, either in the Plattekill lot or where we are right now in Village Hall. And some of the other small urban communities with municipal parking have either elaborate wayfinding signs or even elaborate welcoming signs, Ours, it's a little bit different. The configuration of our Plattekill lot, the fact that it's down in elevation a bit. There is a sign that says metered parking. If we could swing it, I'd recommend something that really welcomes drivers to make that left onto Plattekill and use the two biggest municipal parking lots that we have in town.
Yeah, we had, when we metered that lot, and we did a number of other changes to the one-street meters, we had discussed a whole, exactly this, different kinds of signs, and placement of signs, not only on the Main Street side, but even on the, over here on the Hasbrook side. But it wasn't implemented, but there were discussions about that. I agree with you. I think signs other than the sort of standard green municipal parking signs, and signs that guide people to the place ahead of time, and then lots that have distinctive, and there's a connection, either font or color or whatever, it makes it easy for people to find them. So, yeah, it's well worth it.
That's true. I did discover that. I think it was. Is it RSG or Resource Systems?
Yeah.
Okay. I did see. There was a wayfinding section, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think. And again, it was during this period of a lot of comprehensive planning that was going on, and in the last decade. And just as you said, there was very specific recommendations. Well, I know that signs don't grow on trees, so. And neither does the money
Except
for
on Main
them.
Street.
But I think
But you're learning
at least an initial investment would be really wise. Because you can see folks driving around, and then they go through the let's say the main drag between North Front Street and Chestnut, and there's no, it just so happens it's not we don't have a strict grid system where you can easily find your way back. So there are a lot of folks who, at that point are understandably confused as drivers when they're trying to find a place to park.
Yeah.
Could you get down your street last weekend? Could you get by your street this weekend? Good Lord, he had a farmer's market at one end of the street and a chalk festival on the other
Yeah,
side.
it's pretty tough. Just walk on those days, get out.
But yeah, it's amazing how many people were in New Paltz this past weekend, and they put their cars somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the lots were well used, a lot of Human Street was full up.
Well, Casey Stengel was quoted as saying nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was New Paltz.
That's New Paltz.
It's interesting. And what I tried to do beginning last summer was understand, what was the on a somewhat anecdotal basis, what was it like on weekends in the village lot? Well, even on weekends where there's an awful lot going on, and there are an awful lot of folks here, fairly empty, pretty empty.
Yeah, this lot is underutilized.
Okay, and I have to say there's villages like ours in the Hudson Valley and beyond where you really wouldn't be able to get that decent of a spot. If you think about it, you can almost see Main and Plattekill from here or the Plattekill lot. So it's I have to believe that we could probably create an improvement there. It won't decongest the streets and Main Street in particular, but I think that without too much doing, and then hopefully that will occur. We also talked a little bit about the board process and what it means to small businesses. There's probably I can.
No.
My show's fine. Thanks. Go for it.
It's on the videotape.
Exactly. Come on.
No, that,
Videotape. There's on videotape.
As far as the residential districts, as far as looking at the zoning for our residential districts, there's that is my assignment, is to look at each and every zoning district. If we do take them one by one, I think we're in for, and this was something that was a threshold issue even before I was hired, and that is whether or not we could proceed without a master plan first, and where we've done this planning, most notably along North Chestnut, is where we were able to move and move to adopt the North Chestnut Street Gateway District. Otherwise, as far as what well, actually, the village board, of course, adopted 2 local laws last summer. One was that single-family and two-family, the construction of single-family or two-family dwellings now requires site plan approval. That was a major step. I think it was somewhat in response to building that was going on. And so when the moratorium is lifted, we will begin to see those types of applications. Those are getting restricted from us for now. What I did was I drafted an extension of the moratorium, although I'm not myself convinced that there is a race to diligence that we're holding back by virtue of our interim zoning or moratorium.
Let me ask you a question on that for a second. Are we going to see a site plan on the No Place Like Home project?
Well, that's in litigation right now. And I don't know that I'm able to discuss
Okay.
the specifics of
No.
it, but soon, I believe that soon enough that we will be able to, that would be resolved in some fashion.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be after the fact? Until we build?
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
No, they got.
Oh, you mean the other lot? Oh, okay, got it.
So more to come on that.
Yeah, the one was already negotiated, right? But there's more buildings to come.
Yes, and actually, I guess right now, there are some, we hope to have that resolved. So hopefully, more to come very soon on that, as far as some sort of mutual resolution in that case.
But the new construction is also in the lawsuit, not the already existing ones, the new ones.
Yes, and as much as, and I like to think that I can digest these things, this case was particularly complicated.
No, I don't want to compromise the lawsuit.
So
Yes, we don't have an awful lot of land that's going to get built on, so.
Right.
that's true. Well, although we might have thought that before last summer, but so it was that it occurred, and again, so it was that law requiring site plan review for single and two-family dwellings, and another one that unless you're building a multifamily development, there wouldn't be more than one principal building on a lot. That's a typical zoning regulation, but not one that I'm really enamored with for an urban place that's trying to move towards either form-based zoning or very progressive zoning and mixed-use zoning. But I do understand that in our circumstance, that there was certainly a point behind that.
So the law that you're referring to doesn't cover people building large extensions of homes, right? So
That's correct.
Okay. So that seems to be sort of a loophole that certain people could use to get around and basically double the size of their house and simply have a small connection between the existing house and the new development, or whatever it is.
I have
New
seen,
construction.
yes, I have seen not only here in New Paltz, but elsewhere, I've seen where that has that loophole, to call it, has been exercised. In other words, whether it be called a breezeway or something else.
Right.
There actually are ways to close that loophole. Part of it is by defining these terms and the connection, and even using, I think, even the building code. We haven't really fully exercised all of those things. So I think thankfully there is a way to deal with that. There are also things that exist in our code that talk about complementary architecture, or that the addition proposed to the home comply, and if not, the building inspector refer to the planning board in those cases. Now, that's a lot of discretion to give to a building inspector, but I think that, again, I mean, I'm going to go out a little bit on a limb here and say that it appears to me that there have been additions placed on homes that are not even subjectively, I think it almost objectively be said not to be harmonious with the original home. So that regulation should mean something.
Yeah, but we also closed a lot of that down when we amended the law, tying the number of bedrooms to the square footage of the lot.
That's
Right.
However, this new concept, where you could have one big room this size and put partitions up 7 feet in the air
Yeah,
and make 7 cubicles,
yeah,
but still one room.
yeah, that makes no sense.
No, in fact, that,
Yeah, that's a,
you know, even the
But
building.
that's not holding up.
Well, no, what I mean is, I'll explain it as best I can. You know, the building code is supposed to be something that every building inspector in the state sees in the same way. That's of course not always the case. That's just the way things are. What was previously seen as not forming a room, it's not interpreted that way by our current building inspector. And in fact, he's pointed out to me things in the building code. It becomes a bit of a game because a property owner who really is intent on that will propose different ways, and in the end, our building inspector doesn't want to become a partner in the design of this, and that's not the intention of our building inspector. So our current building inspector does see these as creating rooms. There's because of several things, including where natural light comes from, including egress doorways and the like. So again, it may not change the resultant, it may not change the overall density, but it prevents this, I guess, what is marketed in some fashion as some semi-form of privacy. I'm not sure how it's marketed, I'm not sure how it works, but it would end up having to be one room, and you still might be able, that room under our code and the state building code may still allow 4 occupants, but not dividers, whether or not they stop 6 inches before the ceiling. There's also,
Do you follow
have
this?
to look- there's a lot of, the current building inspector's been very thorough in looking at how you have to have, there are actually rules in the building code that are intended to eliminate and prevent the tenements that were common 100 or more years ago. And some of our building permit applications were amazingly bumping up against those things that were intended to prevent tenement-style living. And so, for example, when you calculate what you need certain amount of common area for each occupant or each bedroom. And I'm not well versed in it enough to actually, cite the regulations, but our new building inspector has helped me gain a better understanding of it. And so when we do start reviewing single-family and two-family homes again, new ones, then I think this will come into play for sure. And it probably will affect existing residences too, because in New Paltz we have an annual inspection of non-owner occupied residences, so we'll affect those too. There won't be grandfathering in the sense that a property or a use can be grandfathered after the change in the zoning ordinance. Grandfathering, as it's called, or legal non-conforming uses would not apply in this sense, mostly because they're related to building code, which is much more health and safety oriented than the general welfare section of the police powers and things like aesthetics and comfort. So we're giving a close look at the inspections we do annually. We need to make sure that they address those things that they address, so that all occupants are as safe as they can possibly be. And again, the fact that we enacted our own chapter of the code that requires these annual inspections of course, it's only worth what as good as its administration and enforcement is. So it could be, it's dangerous to enact something like that and not administer and enforce it properly.
And Kurt, you're closer to the village board than we are. You show up at the meetings more often than we do. How can they cut the building inspector to a 2-day position and then expect to do all these inspections and enforcements?
That's a very valid question, and I think there's been discussions of how this really probably cannot continue to be the case, where we have a building inspector in on Mondays and Wednesdays, and for a total of about 10 hours a week. So I don't think it can continue to be the case. The only things I'm not at liberty to explain are the personnel things that were discussed in an executive session with the village board. So those, not addressing those, I'm going to recommend formally through a memorandum to the village board that they consider how my office is organized and its personnel. There have been and will continue to be great expectations from this office as it existed before and as it's consolidated now. And I'd better make sure that we meet those expectations. And you're right, they're not going to be done on any continuing basis with a building inspector in for 2 days a week.
I mean, do we even do annual inspections for all of the student housing units?
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how they get it done, but
Well,
But you have 2 people who are,
I mean, they currently have a very good man as a building inspector. I think he's actually read the code.
You
I
have,
think he's read it.
yeah,
Different from other inspectors we've had over the years. But he's only here 10 hours a week. And we've got a lot of problems out there
yes.
that the man would have to be, Bruce Almighty to get these
but
things done.
you have another employee here full-time who has code enforcement authority, right?
Yes, we do, and
She has code enforcement authority?
well, I'm sorry, not
No.
well, actually, there's the promotion was provisional, and based upon acquiring the state accreditation to be a certified code enforcement officer. That program is fairly thorough, and so Holly and I have been talking about that, but no, there.
Oh, so it's not, okay, so it's in process.
That's right. So it's however, there's an awful lot of code enforcement activity that she does, but not with regard to building construction and plan review and things like that.
Okay.
And Holly, of course, also has many other responsibilities in everything from answering the calls that come into the building department to a lot of the administrative things. So, but I think I am at a point where I am planning, and I don't mind saying that I need to write to the village board with an assessment of how the office is functioning, and that will include a recommendation that we, and I discussed this a bit with the mayor informally, and that is that we would seek a full-time building inspector. There's a good chance we may be able to continue to use the part-time building inspector that we have, and that he's certified in several areas, including fire inspections. I'm concerned about, there are approximately 1,100 or so non-owner occupied units that need to be inspected, and when I just doing the math, if you just were to take working days each year, and not even accounting for vacation or holidays, you're looking at 4.5 a day to conquer those 1,100 in a year on 5 days a week. So, as I become more and more familiar with what those annual inspections are supposed to be about, I think that we need, if we intend on maintaining that section of our code, that we need to perform those more thoroughly.
My understanding is that we're looking to actually intensify those inspections.
Well, I wasn't aware of that, but I mean, only to the extent that, well, I haven't heard anything about to revise the code. But,
No, not revising the code, no.
There's a lot of information required under that one, including identifying tenants and floor plans. So, and again, I don't want to say I know everything about what preceded me, but I don't think that our filings for those registrations include all of that information. So, and again, the new building inspector is helping me to address those things and make sure that I understand those things that I might not otherwise as not a building inspector, not a certified code enforcement officer.
In an effort to keep this meeting to close up by 9 o'clock, were there other points you wanted to bring up, or Michael or Liz?
No, only that we may. I think the village board has a general.
Or John, you're more than welcome.
I think the village board has a general desire to see us discuss these things and advise me and or the village board in as much as possible. However, I will say that I don't. I think that to a person, I think planning board members have said to the mayor or village board that they're interested in doing so, but it's not like planning board members are going to go home with assignments to write code or text. I don't think I wouldn't ask that. That's not clear that the mayor and I have the same understanding of that. But I understand your role, and it's volunteers and with giving me advice and direction and weighing in on recodification.
Michael, did you want to have a discussion on consultants and?
Well, I know that I haven't really had a chance to review what I had wanted to do, which was to look back over a number of applications we've had and see how consultants have been utilized and whether we've been, as a planning board, consistent with what we've asked different applicants to do. And so I guess my interest is in assessing whether or not we are being consistent and fair. I know I had some disagreements with the chair and a couple of meetings about whether or not the chair of the planning board, regardless of who's sitting in that position, has any more authority to engage consultants on an application than any other member of the planning board. We disagree on that. The written commentary is that the current chair feels that the chair does have that authority, and I don't think that any one of us has any more authority than the other. If we're going to use a consultant for an application, it needs to be a discussion by the planning board and if necessary, a vote. And it has to be affected that way, since it is applicants' money that's being spent. And so that is something I'd like to have a discussion about. I also believe that there are things that we can do that can both expedite applications if necessary and reduce costs. For instance, there's the New York State Department of State has a lot of information for planning boards and planning board members. And one of the things that they have is they have a form that basically is equivalent to the resolutions we've been using when we do special use permits or site plan approvals. And it has it's a boilerplate, and it has basically all the same information. It's not written in legal format, whereas, and therefore. But it contains places to indicate all of the details, and it would be filled out by you or the planning board or whomever, and wouldn't require a legal, a lawyer to write that. So, and be interested to know what those typically cost the way we're doing it now, but this would cost nothing. So I think it's worth, and as far as I know, if it's done properly and it's signed, it would be as legally binding. I mean, the Department of State is putting this out, I assume they've thought about that.
Michael, you're absolutely right, and actually, in the other places where I've worked, that was a typical part of my responsibility. Now, of course, there were applications that rose to a level in terms of the proposed activity, the proposed land uses, the scale, where I found myself working side by side with various consultants. And in some cases, there may have even, they were, of course, retained by escrow. So I don't want to take away from the fact that there are applications where I might be flanked by other professionals working with me, but of course, planners like myself and others do prepare resolutions. And I think the change that we have is, and again, I hope the chair will forgive me, when I said goodbye to him and have a good trip, I said, well, we won't be meeting this evening, and we are. And we're talking about this, and I'm sure he'd like to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
He may forgive me, but let me just say that I think what he and I have talked about, and I think what many know is that the idea of collecting $1,000 as a routine matter is not an acceptable practice under the rules for escrow, really as enunciated by state law, case law, and the comptroller. So in other words, when we have an application, we have to have that discussion initially, and at that time it should be up. And I could look it up, but I think we already know what it says, is that it is the board's decision by a board vote as far as what consultants, if any, are necessary. So I think that goes a long way to perhaps prevent a repeat of some case studies that have been recently accumulated, where, and again, that this is not something that I can put in place myself. It's just that it really brought a lot of things to the surface, and so be it. They should be discussed. In other words, people were asking, well, my position was created, then why not have me do it? And of course, so therefore, when applications come up, the first discussion is there escrow needed, and for what type of consultants? And maybe we can revisit this more when the chair returns.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to usurp that, but my concern was that I think we need to look at sort of what is the flow chart for when an application comes in, and at what steps do we begin to address issues like money and consultants, and I think if there is and there may not be a one-size-fits-all, it depends on the size of the project. There might be a fairly streamlined process for minor projects, and something a bit more developed for a moderate project, and then a very different, something that looks more like our current code for a major development. And so that's one way that I sort of see it, and I would like to have a discussion about that, or discussions about it, so that applicants have a clearer idea, we have a clearer idea, and your responsibilities are also clearer. So, and I think I think it would avoid a lot of problems, and it would make it easier for applicants to know what they have to do coming in.
Well, certainly if we had the sketch plan discussions or preliminary discussions ahead of time, how do we set an escrow without having some idea of what the scope of the project is going to be?
Right.
You know, 1,000 is a shot in the dark.
Yep.
And it may be 0 and it may be 10,000. So, you know, we have an initial, or the applicant waives the right to it, in which case, get ready.
I know, well, that's the thing.
You might
I mean,
find out what consultants cost.
I agree with you. I think that because part of the problem is almost very frequently applicants want their application approved yesterday.
Yes.
And they come in at the very beginning thinking, all right, I'm going to come 1 or 2 meetings and I'm out of here. And instead of saying, like we had at our last meeting, where somebody's coming in with what's going to be an exciting and complicated project, and the first thing they want to do is have a discussion about whether or not this even makes sense. We have a site visit, we have a sit down, and that applicant has a much clearer idea. We have a better idea, and he's gone away knowing what he needs to come back if he wants to submit a formal application and what he can expect. We didn't talk dollars, but it's pretty, he knows it's not going to be expensive. And that, if in general we were visiting sites and having those pre-application conversations, And if an applicant said, there's no way I have time for this, I need this done in a month, then you're right. They have to sign something that waives that right and recognize that it might actually end up costing them more money.
Well, that's, we did start out that way on a couple of applications, but that didn't, in other words, there was an extreme rush to get on a specific agenda, but that didn't prevent the discussion from becoming extremely difficult.
Right.
And having the village board and others and the planning board questioning how we go about it. So there's
Right, but our typical way of doing it, it's not just this board, it's been going on for a number of iterations, is not to have pre-application reviews, is not to tell the applicant when they come to the building department, this is what you need to do first, this is what we strongly recommend that you do. So,
Or we have the wrong person telling them.
what's that?
We have the wrong person telling them.
What do you mean?
Well, they would show up at the building inspector's office
Yeah,
and then come back and say, well, the building inspector said I didn't have to do this.
right, but that shouldn't be the case.
Right, it shouldn't be that.
And,
It shouldn't be with
That's
us.
a good point, and I think maybe it goes to, Michael, as you said, in other words, the nature of the application. And we can identify some types of applications that are, well, quite frankly, don't raise a lot of substantive issues, but all of a sudden have nonetheless a lot of procedural hoops to jump through. And I think we want to do something about those, but there seems to be an understanding as soon as the applications get to be much more significant and larger in scale, then there seems to be an understanding with those applicants, property owners, that the process is not going to be done yesterday. It needs to take its course in some fashion. So I'd say that, yeah, it's on that lower end where we're dealing with smaller businesses and not building from the ground up, not building from scratch, where I think we can make some improvements.
okay, thank you.
The problem is with the smaller businesses. The bigger businesses know to come in early,
Right.
Yeah.
take a stand to their buildings and say, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, no, but it's true, but, we do see a lot of change of use and modifications to buildings and things like that. I mean, in this village, that is a lot of what we get, so, I think we need to sort of, not necessarily streamline it, but figure out how to make it work consistently over and over. Because sometimes people sail right through, and other times they don't. And so I think the process sometimes is part of the reason why it gets problematic. It's not the only reason.
But I mean, I think the other thing we're going to have to look at is that I think the chair, who's ever sitting in it, has the rights to have an attorney look over everything before we put your name to it.
Okay. I would respectfully disagree, but that's okay.
It may not be much. It may be, 1 hour fee. It may be a
Right.
10-minute fee. It doesn't have to be every meeting and every little thing.
Right.
But I think that, I think the chair should have some extra support. Because, who signs the plat?
Oh, well, yes, for subdivisions and things like that, absolutely.
Well, you're right, the site plan is all, we happen, like many municipalities, we opt for the site plan to be signed, so the responsibility is there too. Where subdivision, that's required by state law. to-
Yeah,
to
no,
file it.
that's, yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that that is a cost of the applicant.
Right.
I think that's a cost of running a planning board, to tell you the truth. But,
Well, then,
so either we got to up our application fees to
Doesn't-
cover the cost of running a planning board.
well, actually, we do need, I'm sorry, the job is mine, I need to revisit fees.
Okay.
I'm wondering which thing to do next, and in terms of all the things that I must do for the village. But indeed, yes, you can, the fees can be structured, so, some are filing fees that are simply, that are non-refundable unless perhaps you withdraw the application, whereas escrow is very different, of course. So we realize there are two types of fees. We can use these two types of fees best for the wrong purposes, for the mutual benefit of the village and the applicant, not to be overcharged. And the village has the ability and is encouraged to, by state law, to cover its costs of running the planning and building and zoning department and the planning board activities through fees and break even as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a noble goal. But I also think that having a well-run planning and building and zoning is something we pay taxes for, because that reflects well in the kind of village we have.
You're right, and you also,
Besides which, the village needs income. And where does the income come from?
Right.
It comes from real estate.
Yeah.
You know, except for some parking meters, some change. It comes from the real estate.
yes, the property.
And what
tax.
do? We hire part-time assessors, part-time building inspectors, part-time this.
You're right.
Our biggest income generator is our real estate, and we treat it like Cinderella.
That's a good point.
That's a good way to look at it, in the sense that there's benefits for a robust planning board and planning
We're
program.
very fortunate that we have a Main Street that's fully occupied.
Mhm.
And we don't have for sale signs all over the place on vacant properties. We got people out there trying to hit the lottery and some of their for sale signs. But we're very fortunate in that effect. And I think that to keep that up, behooves us to do a good job on this board.
Yes.
But I remember the biggest mistake the school district ever made was one year, they hired a cheap business manager who forgot to file all the papers with New York State and cost us a 30% tax raise. Do you remember this? I don't know, it was early 80s. It cost us like a 30% tax raise one year.
Like,
They saved a whole bunch of money on that guy, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Real estate is the income generator for the village. Without it, there is no village.
Well, that's true. Municipalities rely on that.
It is.
that's a good point.
Liz, anything you want to toss?
No, thank you, Brian.
Just when we have no other new applications coming our way, no pizzerias looking to reopen on Main Street.
Well,
Thank you, Kurt.
sure. Thank you all.
No, thank you for coming.
And then again, this was short notice. Next time, I would hope to provide you with some suggested subject matters in advance.
Thanks.
But I know the village board and the mayor in particular really appreciate these discussions, and would like them to see them continue.
Thank you. We're done.
Motion to adjourn?
Huh?